I've been conducting interviews about games for 15 years, and I think I've really encountered every circumstance you could possibly find. Today was different. I went over to 2K to get some time to go hands-on with the Bureau, XCOM Declassified, and found myself with the opportunity to speak to a gentleman who worked in the British Ministry of Defense. And in the early 90s, he was transferred to a department that studied UFOs. Yes, somewhere in British military intelligence, there were people who were devoted to trying to figure out unexplainable flying phenomena in the sky. We then proceeded to have a talk about aliens, the unknown, and how video games might be prepping us for the inevitable invasion. So, Nick, thank you so much for your time. For the sake of our audience, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us the backstory of how you found yourself in the Ministry of Defense doing the UFO research.
I'd been in the Ministry of Defense for some years, and they move you around every 2 or 3, 4 years, something like that. And then out of the blue, one day, I was asked, you're due for a move. We've got a post available, slightly unusual job. Do you want it? And I said, what's the job? And they said, UFOs. And I said, wow, yeah, okay.
So were you aware that there was a division that would look into something that would seem to be as marginal as UFO research?
I'd seen it in the Ministry of Defense phone book, which bizarrely was itself a classified document at the time. And there was just this one little, all the jobs had detailed descriptions by them, and then there was this one little section, it just said UFOs, and everyone was like, wow, what do they do?
So how long had it been part of the Ministry of Defense where this was something that was considered to be taken seriously enough that they would allocate human resources to it?
The MOD got into the whole UFO issue in 1950 and had been looking at it ever since then. I mean, it really was something that was a throwback to the early days of the Cold War, the idea that people were seeing strange things in the sky, and not just the public. These things were being seen by our own Air Force people, and they were being tracked on radar. We were scrambling jets to try and intercept them, and sometimes these things, whatever they were doing speeds and maneuvers that we just couldn't match.
So when you're talking about this instance where you're looking at objects that seem to be behaving in a way that's far more advanced than what the contemporary technology would allow, if you wouldn't mind giving a sense of contrast of what a jet in, say, the 1960s or in the 1980s or 90s was supposed to do and what you were actually seeing on a radar.
Well, the best military jets back then could really do, just about struggle to do Mach 1, so speed of sound. And they certainly couldn't do very, aggressive maneuvers because of the G-forces. You'd end up killing the pilot. And in fact, a number of pilots did pass out and crash their airplanes because of that. So when you had UFOs doing maybe, as was reported sometimes, Mach 10, we kind of thought, well, if this is the Soviets, it's game over. I mean, we don't even come close. And then a few people began to think, well, it just can't be the Soviets. Nothing. I mean, even if they've got a little bit of ahead of us in rocket technology or something, this would be a quantum leap. And therefore, 1 or 2 people did dare to think the unthinkable. Could it be?
So let's fast forward to the 1990s when you're there. The Soviet Union has fallen, so you don't have the same, I think, anxiety nor sort of the other that you can sometimes try to put the blame on. How many of these sightings were still happening, and how were you trying to interpret them then?
We were receiving about 200 or 300 UFO reports a year when I did the job. And although the Soviet Union had broken up, I mean, Russia was still a potent military threat. There were other nations, such as the Chinese, that clearly we had an eye on in terms of aviation technology. So we didn't completely rule out that idea that we were still dealing with just secret prototype aircraft and drones, even the idea that they might be our own. And that would have been the really ironic thing if there was another secret part of the Ministry of Defense and the Air Force developing things, and the other half of the organization was chasing these things. And some people say, well, look, with secrecy being the way it is, that's possible.
So I think I'm to the point where I have to ask you, did you finally see things during your tenure there which made you actually think that there really could be, or some of these occurrences could be the result of extraterrestrial life or objects?
I saw a few things that certainly made me stop and think, maybe, just maybe. I mean, with hand on heart, though conspiracy theorists always disbelieve me on this and think I'm part of the conspiracy, I have not seen, that we've got some alien spacecraft in an Air Force hangar somewhere. But I've seen in the archive of Ministry of Defense files cases that are just mind-blowing, and investigated a few myself. We had a landing, this was before my time, but December 1980, we had a UFO that landed near two military bases, multiple witnesses, some of them got close enough to see strange symbols on the side of this thing, one of them touched it, the whole thing illuminated. There was radioactivity on the ground when the next day we went out and looked at the clearing. There were marks on the ground where this craft had landed. The inside edges of the trees facing the clearing were all burnt and scorched, and the radioactivity was 7 or 8 times higher than normal.
So what did it look like? I think the term UFO is, its parlance is so strong that we immediately think of the disc, that thing that was established in the 1950s. So, I mean, is this similar? This object that you're describing? Did it look like that, or was it something cruder?
This one was kind of almost triangular craft, a little bit smaller than most people imagine. I mean, this thing actually landed in a clearing in a forest. It had to smash its way down through the treetops, land, and then take off again. Something like, imagine a lunar landing module, something like that. Did it come from a larger craft, maybe? And you get into speculation about probe ships and motherships. And the bottom line is that in the Ministry of Defense files, these things really do come in all shapes and sizes. Yes, we got the classic disc-shaped craft, but we got cigar-shaped objects, spheres, huge triangles, the smaller triangles too. I mean, really, the list is endless. So
there's this idea that if we see enough aliens in our entertainment, then when an alien actually emerges in real life, we already have some kind of conditioning about how to treat them and react to them.
Exactly. There's this old kind of cliche of panic in the streets, and people say it's one of the motives for UFO secrecy. No government could tell people that there are extraterrestrials visiting the Earth and maybe, even gearing up for an alien invasion, because there would be panic in the streets. But there's an old saying that you don't shock people by telling them something they already believe. So if through science fiction movies, through computer games, you get people so acclimatized to the reality of this, there would be no panic in the streets. So, that's where the conspiracies begin about my involvement, and the lines between fact and fiction get kind of blurred.
What's interesting is that, obviously, I come from the video game side of things, where if there's any one conditioning about aliens that I've been taught in my 15 years is, if you see one, shoot it. It is kind of the core entertainment inside of it. You just hit on what's just like such a cornerstone of so much sort of popular and science fiction literature in games and other forms of entertainment, which is we tend to say with the game The Bureau, look at, say, a UFO division as a defensive one, that we need to steel ourselves against this impending invasion. But then there's the flip story where there's the acquisition of the knowledge and the hardware, which could be a corrupting influence or could be an empowering one. If you were to sort of, which one would you favor in terms of these pop cultural motifs would typify UFO divisions, be it in the UK or in the USA?
Well, there's a highly classified, now actually released, study that the British government did into this called Project Condign. And again, if you look beyond the little headline conclusions, it actually talks about technology acquisition, and it goes on to talk about things like directed energy weapons. And the view again was, look, we don't know what UFOs are, but just if they are something from beyond this Earth, we must have that technology. I mean, the nation that acquires that will be the dominant force on this planet, militarily, industrially, economically, politically, I mean, it would be the ultimate game changer. And that's a heck of a good reason for secrecy.
Yes, that makes complete sense. So I think my final question is, after the time that you spent in this division, do you now look at the world differently? I mean, do you maybe look over your shoulder a little bit more or look up into the sky and with more apprehension than the average person?
Yes, I think I do. I look up at the skies at night and I don't just see the stars. I see maybe the possibilities, the opportunities, but also the potential threats.
Well, all I can say is after our discussion today, I'm no longer looking at my job as work, it's training. Thank you so much for your time, Nick.
Thank you.